So today we have, as I mentioned, conducting post-mortem meetings without blame, presented by Julie. Julie has over a decade of experience overseeing the completion of projects from the kickoff meeting to the final deliverable, ensuring projects are executed on time and on budget. Julie's background in project management includes overseeing the successful completion of e-learning projects for Fortune 500 companies in various areas. With a dedication to client service, Julie has coordinated all development, video, audio, and technical aspects of projects and managed both in-house teams and contract resources in doing so. So with that, I will turn it over to Julie. Julie.
Thank you, Rick. And thanks, everybody, for joining today. This is my third Thought Rock presentation, and I very much enjoy doing them. So I'd like to thank everybody for logging in. And I hope you leave today with some insight and some additional knowledge. Anyway, we will move right on into it. For anyone who has been on any of my presentations before, I always like doing a case study. Always like to put things in the real world. So let's start with it. Dan was a project manager on a project that did not go well. Deadlines missed, it went over budget, his team had to work evenings and weekends, and in the end, it did not meet clients' expectations. I would love to say that I have never, ever encountered a project like this, but I'd be lying. And I think most of us have had either indirect experience or direct experience with something similar to this, hence the post-mortem meeting. So what do most of us do when we encounter a project like this and we've been the PM on it? I'm going to venture a guess that most of us say, oh, thank goodness it's done. You know, I know what happened and I am never going to let that happen again. And we go on our way to the next project, vowing it will not end up like this one. But the trick is, do we actually know what happened? We've only got one version of what happened, really, because it's our own. The key is to talk about it, to break it down, to look at it, and figure out what happened. So, where is our friend Dan? Well, he's informed now that there'll be a post-mortem meeting in 2 weeks with the client on this project. He's asked to compile a report noting the factors that led the project to its current state. Dan begins to panic. He doesn't want to have to point fingers. He just wants to do his job and do it well. And now he has to document all this stuff. Dan's reaction is totally understandable. That word post-mortem, it's just unpleasant. One imagines having to spend an hour or two defending themselves and their competency as a PM and defending their colleagues. That's what we envision. Creating a report of what happened can also be daunting. Most of us really have confidence and faith in the people we work with, and no one wants to have to point out what they, figure quotes, did wrong. And telling a client what they, again, did wrong, well, that's a terribly awkward position to be in. So, how are we going to help Dan through this? It's all in the wording. This is what Dan is thinking. How do I survive this meeting? So, let's look at how we speak. I've seen blogs, articles on a ton of topics, not just postmortems, and they use the word survive, how to survive such and such. In these cases, I don't love it. It basically means you endured it, you got through it. It was some kind of hardship or punishment inflicted upon you. And when we use this language and when we think in these terms, we panic, just like Dan is panicking. How can we not? It just conjures up images of being in some kind of danger. So right now we're going to remove the word survive from the sentence and change it to, how do I conduct this meeting? How do I handle this meeting? Or any other word that signifies that you have some control over it, because you do. But you don't automatically have control over it. Like any good PM, you got to do your pre-work. You got to prepare. So there you have it. So that is step number one. I'd also like to point out that when you start talking in those terms, the people around you are affected by that. So if you're walking around to your team going, oh, we just got to get through this, I don't know, we'll just get through and we'll just handle it the best we can, and I'm not sure what we're going to do. No, you can tell your team, okay, I'm compiling this report. We're going to conduct the meeting. We're going to structure it. Anything that is very active and controlled. That's the best way to show it to your team. That way they feel like, okay, my PM really has the situation in hand. Because let's face it, that's our job. So, a true project manager. Project managers don't do the job they do for the accolades. Most of us don't. Those usually go to the team. The opposite happens when a project goes south. I think most of us as PMs who oversee the project, we do take on the onus is on us when a project does not go well. So, you know, how do we walk into a post-mortem meeting when we as PMs know that we're the ones who oversaw this project? We know it didn't go well. My advice is to accept it gracefully. There's a difference between, however, being accountable and being a scapegoat. That we'll get to later. But it is our job to accept responsibility, not blame, but responsibility, and then we can work towards improvement. But we do need to acknowledge our role, both positive and where we found our challenges, before committing to learn and grow from what happened. We can all say, yeah, I know it didn't go well, but it's not going to happen the next time. Understanding what didn't go well, and more importantly, why, is key to moving forward. So, the takeaway from this is no bruised egos. There's no, I've said this before in many presentations, you got to leave your ego at the door. It's not always easy, but in this case, it's absolutely necessary. So, back to Dan. Here are his concerns. They're going to blame me. I'm going to have to blame my team members. I have to admit failure. And truthfully, these also used to be my concerns. That's where they come from. However, postmortems are actually a really productive way to close a project, as you can discuss and document all you've experienced on the project. It also, you're setting yourself up not to repeat the past. Because when we don't learn from the past, I mean, it's a very, very cliche, but when we don't learn from the past, we're doomed to repeat it. You look at these concerns, and they're very basic. Blame, failure, it's fearful. So it's not so much a concern. I'm going to say these are Dan's fears. And the way, and let's face it, post-mortem, again, it does conjure up a very fearful imagery. So let's get the fear out of it. And the way to do that is to take control over what you can. So write it down. That I can't stress that enough. When you start putting things on paper, as it were, you can really start breaking it down, structuring it, and it's not quite so scary. Dan's worry is that he has to do the report, but ironically, it's what will make the meeting successful and give him the control and structure he needs. If you go into a post-mortem without proper documentation and without a defined agenda, I can't stress enough how this meeting will not go in the right direction. It will turn into a group of people blaming each other with absolutely no outcome and no takeaway. That's one of the main things you can do to conduct a post-mortem meeting in a way that is a way that speaks to continuous improvement rather than who did what and who should apologize. What you need to do is make sure it's structured. Get your agenda, introductions, overview of the project, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We'll go down a longer list in a bit. But again, if you take anything away from this presentation, structure your post-mortem meeting. Make sure there is clear definition on what is to be discussed and what is to be accomplished. Put time parameters around it, everything you need to do. Again, if it turns into a free-for-all, nothing will get accomplished and it will turn into a blame game. So how do we do this? Where does Dan start? Well, it's critical to begin his report and your reports with the initial objectives of the project. You want to give an overview of the time, the cost, the resources, the software needed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever is relevant to your project, whatever the project parameters are, start with that. Introduce what the project was supposed to be. This is for two reasons. First reason is you want to reacquaint everyone in the meeting the purpose of the project and its expectations. There might be some people who come in with a different idea. There might be some people coming into this meeting who weren't involved in the, the nitty-gritty of the project. Just don't assume. Just give an overview. Many times at the end of a project, particularly one that has not gone to plan, we forget our original intent, or it morphed into something in different people's minds that isn't aligned anymore. Review what you wanted to achieve and what then actually happened. Hindsight is 20/20 is probably one of the most applicable sayings in these cases, and mistakes are never as clear than after we've made them. That goes in, I think, in all walks of life. It's okay to admit that, as long as you have a solution for going forward next time. Another reason is documenting what happened on the project can help you down the road. Let's say you get another project and it has the same parameters. You can look at your postmortems and see what happened and why. Again, you're not doomed or condemned to repeat the past. That's really why this is postmortems are great. You can learn from them, and it makes the next projects even more successful. If you're stuck on where to start, because that's usually where we all get stuck, right? You're looking at this blank Excel sheet or a Word doc or whatever, however you're supposed to do this report, and you think, what do I do? Start categorizing it into one of three buckets: people, process, and technology. Identifying the barriers and challenges is one thing, but to note what they were and to categorize them is where the learning happens. Example, maybe you had a process that didn't work on one of your projects. Well, because you're noting it and you're putting it in this process bucket, saying, this, I don't know, this process did not work for this client because this, and this weren't aligned. Well, if you note that, then it's okay to find out that this just doesn't work in this case, because the next project, you won't do it. And that's okay, especially if you have a client who's recurring business. You say, okay, we were wrong. It's okay. Again, it's okay to say that. We were incorrect in choosing this type of process. Here's what we're going to do the next time. You've documented it, and we know we just don't do that anymore. Another thing, people. The bucket of people. Not having enough people on a project can be an issue. So if you have a project of the same magnitude next time, you need more resources of maybe software resources or developer. It doesn't matter. You just know that you can't get a project done with the amount of people you had on it. Sometimes it's not the right people. Maybe you needed, I'm just going to throw an example, maybe you needed a medical writer and you didn't have that. Or maybe you needed, in terms of technology, maybe you needed to use this type of software versus that type of software. It's not, and this is why I like putting it into buckets, because you're not saying, John chose to use Captivate and it was the wrong choice. You say, Captivate didn't work in this case, and we all know that. It's documenting what went wrong, but without making people feel really bad about it, but also taking accountability that, yes, we did choose to use this software. We're not going to again. So there you go. So this is where it can also get tricky, but it doesn't have to. You can also note where your client needs some accountability. Let's say if it's an external project, you're not doing it internal. Your client didn't get you the needed assets so you could create something. Well, it's okay to note that. I would definitely word it appropriately, but if critical materials, assets, what have you, were not delivered in time for you to meet a deadline and it then had a snowball effect, you do need to note that, and that's okay for the client to take accountability. What you also have to note, though, is if you didn't manage that risk, if you just sort of said, well, they're not sending it to us, so we're not going to work on it, that's also your accountability. So it does go both ways, right? You can, and through that, for example, if you didn't get assets you needed from a client, but nobody followed up or waved the flag that, yes, there is a risk here, you can create a new process out of that, a follow-up process. So really, again, positive can come out of what is perceived as negative. Ironically, the one thing people forget to note is the good stuff, too. Postmortem is such a scary negative word. You forget to add the accomplishments as well as the challenges in the report. Don't forget to do this. It doesn't have to be, okay, what went wrong, let's fix it. Yes, you do have to write what didn't go well. put what did go well. Put why, maybe we went over time, but we stayed on budget. How did you do that? That kind of thing. There's nothing wrong with saying the good points. That way you can keep doing them. I wouldn't put the good points there as to say, yeah, we did this, but that doesn't matter because we did this well. It's not that kind of thing. It's just a documentation thing.
Julie, quick question.
Yeah.
A couple things. Just want to make sure I do a check here. The slide that we're all on still is write it down. Is that still the right slide?
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm going to move
no, that's
on.
okay.
Yes.
That's okay. No, that's a quick question on that. So based on the documentation, the emphasis that you're putting on documentation and writing it down and that sort of thing, would you consider, and I'm assuming you would, that that part of the project management is critical intellectual property gathering for the organization on a go-forward basis?
You know what? I was just going to, you couldn't have introduced it at a better time, because my next point is to include others as well. So it is a document that that the project manager owns. However, like I said before, that one person's perspective is great, but how did your developer see it? What is your account manager's perspective? It's a document that is created from gathering of information. Also, remember to include your client's input too. Remember those phone calls. Review those emails. Your client needs a voice in the report too. Everybody, it's the PM's report that should have everybody's voice in it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think, again, the critical part is the why I think this is such a critical exercise that I think is missed oftentimes is, again, from my perspective, whether it's whether these are ITIL sub-projects or they're projects in any other facet of the organization, that the lessons learned through projects, the storage and gathering of that intellectual property is what becomes a foundation of which other projects can be built upon for the organization. The lessons learned, and if it's not captured and stored and easily accessible, then obviously it's a missed opportunity to do so.
That's exactly it, and that's there's a slide on that. So I'm glad you set me up for that. I couldn't agree more. Yep. There's no point doing this report and hiding it in a file cabinet and having dust grow on it. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so next slide. How do we not play the blame game? It's best ways. I've got some tips here. Reinforce that the meeting is not for punishment but for learning. And this part is really critical. Don't punish people for being honest later. If somebody comes into that meeting and gives an opinion how they feel, it's not really fair to pull them aside and say, hey, you shouldn't have said that. It has to be a place where people really, I mean, obviously, appropriately, but people feel like they can share what happened. Include people. Part of this is obviously you want the people who are on the project to be a part of it, but people are more diplomatic and look for the lesson learned and not so quick to scapegoat when they're a part of the meeting and they can talk it out. Your goal is to document what went right and what went wrong and why. Go in thinking, again, you have nothing to prove and a lot to learn. I'm going to stay on this point for just a second. I think a lot of us, when when asked to do a post-mortem meeting, we think, okay, well, I'm just going to have to show them that, this didn't happen and, oh, we have to protect our team and blah, blah, blah. Try and shift the thinking. You're going in there to learn. You're going in there to grow. You're going in there to improve. You're not going in there to, you're not going to battle. It's the best way to go in, because even, let's say your client is going in there, in not so great a mood. If you're setting the tone, then that tone will be contagious. You don't want a contentious meeting. You want a collaborative meeting. Your client's input is critical. Don't be afraid of it. It's okay if your client says, I wasn't happy. Listen, try and listen to it rather than shy away from it. If the client goes down the blaming road, ask leading questions. This project was a mess. Well, how do you feel this should have been handled? What could we have done better? Where do you think we could have improved? Get them talking, not accusing. Yes, no questions aren't that effective, because, to the next point, listen. You don't want to jump to defense. Once you start listening, all clients really want, and I've said this before in other presentations, they just want somebody to hear them. They want to know that you're really listening. So get them talking. Pull the information out from them. I'm not happy with the way the project is. Yeah, I know you're not happy. What in particular did you find most challenging on this project, etc. Share it. Oops. Okay, I think I might have lost everybody, but
No.
I'm going to keep going.
No, I think we got you. Can you hear me?
Oh, you've got me? Yeah,
Yeah.
I just lost audio.
No, we're good. We haven't lost you yet. So if you pop that back.
Okay, good.
Yep, we're good. We just.
Okay, good. I have to pop that back up then.
No worries.
Okay. There we go. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Okay, so share it. This is back to Rick's point, and it may sound crazy. A project failed and you want to advertise it? Yes, you should. A post-mortem no one sees does no one any good. We just spoke about this a few minutes ago, but it can be a great way to start turning things around. If you feel there is no structure or order to your projects, or if you find yourself saying all the time, next time will be different, it will help you identify and keep the good parts while finding and throwing out the bad parts. If you're not already using it, it's not too late to start. I highly recommend using it for your projects. So, case study. What happened to Dan? Well, the meeting began with finger pointing. Dan's developer then got very defensive. Dan redirected everybody to the agenda and focused on going through his report. He couldn't have done that if it wasn't written and structured and organized in advance. He asked the leading questions, started to get more insightful responses, and then because of those responses, he even got some acknowledgement of positive aspects of the project. A list of proposed solutions was the takeaway with a clear delivery date. The reason I decided to write it like this is this has been my case with most meetings, most post-mortem meetings when a project hasn't gone well, that it begins a little tense, and if you can keep everyone focused, if it shows to your client that you did the work, it was important to you to get it organized, structured, and you really put the time in, then you can really start talking and having the conversation about what the client needed and what didn't happen. And then you can easily save the relationship if you listen and you actually make solutions based on recommendations. So that is it in a nutshell. Is there any questions?
Yeah, a couple of questions, Julie. Can you hear me?
I can.
Excellent. So one is a question here from Madeline. Just hopefully maybe you have some insight here. How do you control, oops, my questions just jumped ahead on me there. How do you control the report not being used against teams and individuals after the fact? So I guess she's kind of asking maybe for some ideas on, people aren't using the reports. So I'm going to kind of set up a scenario. So you do a post-mortem, you show what went wrong, but you don't want somebody pulling that report out saying, well, look at this project, you didn't do that great on this part of it, and this failed, and this was supposed to make this budget, but you didn't do that. I've got it all here in this report. And again, it does depend what kind of management you have and how they use it, but I can say this report can also protect you, because I would prefer to have what happened written down and agreed upon by all parties rather than go and have somebody speculating about what happened or taking a guess. It's very easy to say, well, Bill should have done that and he didn't, and then that gets in somebody's head. Well, maybe, the whole story isn't there. At least if you have a report, the whole story is there. And can you control management if they want to use that report as kind of a weapon? Only so much. But my answer to that would be documented protects you in that at least you know it's the truth and you had a voice in it. That's also why it's really important to do it as an information gather and put and the PM includes everybody in it. And a second question is, isn't it better to have a neutral external party facilitate the meeting? Interesting question.
That is interesting, and I'm going to answer it very honestly. I have not experienced that. I think it's a very interesting idea. I think that could happen if a project has gone extremely south and it needs to, I mean, maybe there's some financial issues or this and that happened as a result, or it has the potential to become very contentious, then perhaps, yeah, a neutral party. I think that's a really interesting idea, and I'm going to actually take a look into that.
And I'm not sure if you've ever experienced this one, Julie. This is an interesting question. It's once you discuss, pull information from the client, how do you keep them from, quote, taking over a project if you do another project for them? In other words, they feel you are inadequate and will monopolize the next project.
And that's where the scapegoating thing gets tricky, because you can only hear, well, you did that wrong the last time, or that didn't go the last time. You can only have that thrown at you so much. And I think it is important to talk about the post-mortem meeting, at the post-mortem meeting, if there is a next project, to say, next project is a blank slate. It's a blank slate. I mean, we're going in clean. We're doing new this, new that, or we've refined this, we've refined that. Let's move away from this other project and start fresh. And I know that that might actually counteract some things I said, but if you do have somebody who doesn't want to let go of the past, that is difficult. If the client taking over, it's a personality thing with the client. But as long as you, as the PM, if you have control, I mean, I don't know too many clients who want to do, let's say, status reports, or want to lead status calls, or want to be the one to flag risk. I mean, as much as clients want to have their voice, as long as you're doing what you need to do as a PM, it should, my favorite word, it should all work out.
Okay, great. Excellent. I don't see, let me just see here. Oh, we got a comment here. I'm not sure we, that's an interesting one here too. Well, this is a comment and we'll share it with folks because maybe it's also some pain point for everybody. I felt a few times like I was going to the slaughterhouse.
Pardon?
I felt a few times like I was going into the slaughterhouse. So it's more of a feeling of going into probably some of these post-mortem meetings. Ended meditating before starting preparation of the docs I was going to bring with me to that meeting. That's actually very, very, very funny. So I think that's probably some of the feeling that sometimes, and I think it's a cultural thing in terms of organizational culture. If someone feels like a post-mortem meeting is going into a slaughterhouse, I mean, therein lies, there is a problem there. Right?
Yeah, I agree with you, because I mean, if it's why I try and change wording, but. And it's like you said, company culture. If post-mortem meetings are a scary thing and everybody's getting attacked, then yeah, that's a really, it's a funny analogy, but not quite so funny when you're the one who has to walk in and you feel like that. Again, as much control as you can have over the meeting is the best. I always feel that the person who conducts themselves with dignity is the winner, and I think people do see that when you are dignified, when you accept your responsibility, but don't point fingers and blame, but just say, well, here's what happened, and this is what could happen. It's the way to go in there, and I know it's very hard, especially if you do have a company culture filled with blame. You can't always change that, but you can. It's another cliche, but the only thing you can do is control your own reaction.
Right.
You know.
And I would say my comment on that, Julie, too, in terms of if it was folks that my expectation of people that would be working in our organization would be that going into those post-mortem meetings, you take control early, and you take accountability early, so you don't leave it to these slaughterers to come out firing. Is that you acknowledge the challenges, and you acknowledge maybe some of the challenges right away. And again, I think that taking control is extremely important, rather than letting the meeting control you.
Yeah, and I do think it's hard to attack somebody who's saying, yes, I know I could have done this better, and here's what I've really thought about it, and I'm really going to improve this, this, and this. It's hard to stay, well, at least for me, it's hard to continue frustration with somebody who's behaving in a way that isn't frustrating, who's behaving in a way that's very proactive. So again,
Yeah,
you can
and I would
control
say,
how you react to it and how you behave.
yeah, and I would say that based on that comment about the slaughterhouse, because again, I do really think that's a fear. I mean, whether we're talking very specifically about ITSM projects, which a lot of the folks on the line are involved in, the fact is where project management overlaps ITIL, ITIL is kind of an end result that we're seeking, and in seeking that end result
Right.
is multiple projects. So multiple postmortems, obviously, and I think I think going in and disarming going into the slaughterhouse and disarming is so critical of a skill of a project manager, because if you don't disarm, then you potentially have that meeting going into a downward spiral pretty quickly, right? So I think that is important.
And again, if you go in afraid, and I know it's hard, but going in afraid, people smell fear, right? But people also see confidence. So it's also how you sit down and present yourself, and the tone of your voice, and it's what you're showing people as well. So
Absolutely,
that's
100%.
part of it as well. Yeah.
Julie, do you have a post-mortem template that you could share that you use?
I certainly could. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe
I would love to. I actually love to stop calling them postmortems.
you know what? Just the nature of that term is obviously very terrible. Quite honestly,
it is. It's horrible. Yeah. But that's what everyone calls them. So I continue to do it. But I really would like to start using another name for them.
So maybe we need to invent one.
Exactly.
Okay.
But yes, I can definitely put one out there once this presentation's archived. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll make sure that's available somehow. But good question. The other question was also question about after action report. Is there some other kind of, again, I guess they're asking for a report or a template towards that?
Yeah, like a basically a next steps or solutions, or I'll see.
Sorry, no, that's not what the question is. It's a suggestion on. Maybe it's saying call it. Oh, these two came from two different people. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to manage these questions coming in. Someone's saying call them the after project meetings.
Yep.
But yeah, sorry. Madeline is asking about an after action report.
Okay. Yes and yes. I like after project meeting, post project, closeout, something. Yeah. Post, after, something that just says it's finished. That also, it's funny, the wording of that, it's kind of like we finished the project. Isn't that great? It's kind of a nice way to get everybody together, you know? It just sends such a different message. And yeah, I can definitely, oftentimes, and I'll just to go on that other one, the after project report, oftentimes what I'll do is make notes on the original post-mortem document about each problem that I've bucketed, and I leave a blank place for the solution, and I note it there. So it's kind of in real time, and it's connected to the document. I can definitely take a look and see what I've got in my files for an after project report, though, for sure.
Okay. One more question, actually, and it's interesting because we're talking about this after project name instead of a post-mortem or whatever we want to call it. And there's some interesting literature written on, especially when it comes to idle projects, or actually any project for that matter, is when you think about the critical path to a project, and is there good rationale, and is it a good best practice to think of post-mortem concept at these critical paths in a large project versus it being only at the end? Do we regroup and have the concept of kind of post-mortem at this stage, because think about what that potentially can do to get the rest of the project on back on the rails. So, I mean, have you had any experience, Julie, with any kind of execution of that kind of those kinds of meetings?
I don't do them, but I would say if you've got a project that's lasting longer than a few months, or I mean any project that's a long project, absolutely, I think it's a great idea to do check-ins like that, and major check-ins, not just here's our weekly status. Those are important. I've talked about those in prior presentations. But yeah, I think it's a great idea if you've got a long project that has all kinds of moving pieces. Sure, every 3 months, etc. A great idea to check in and do an official check-in like that.
Yeah, and again, I think that's a skill of the project leader to be able to understand the pulse of what's happening and to call those meetings and not, like you
At
said,
appropriate
not it
times.
to be a project status meeting, but to have a very specific objective, which is quite honestly your definition of a postmortem.
Hmm.
At this stage of the project, let's do a postmortem up until this point of the critical path, or however you want to define it.
Yeah.
Interesting concept, though.
It is, because I'm thinking back to a point I made in my presentation, which was define the objectives of the project. Well, sometimes, and I think we all probably, you might be nodding your head, sometimes the start of the project and in the middle of the project look like two different projects. So if you check in at 3 months, 6 months, whatever, what have you, and you redefine, okay, here was the original scope, here's what we wanted to accomplish, are we accomplishing it? Are we doing what we set out to do? Is our intent still the same? It helps with scope creep, it helps with all kinds of things. So I think it's a really, really effective idea.
And I do think I leave it with this again, because I know Julie does this, very well, and I will, also I think that's why we have Julie do these sessions, is that, Julie doesn't back down from these post-mortem meetings, and I think, and I kind of say that tongue in cheek, but I really do believe that. I think a lot of people's fear comes out of what that individual's question was earlier from the group that's on the phone, is this fear of the slaughterhouse, and I think the avoidance ends up being worse. So I think it's a real interesting leadership technique and cultural challenge is to look forward to the opportunity to get things back on track and make improvements, and that psychology of the post-mortem meeting will make a significant difference, and it shouldn't be overlooked. That it is a real opportunity to be a leader, and to be able to accept those meetings and be able to change them.
Yeah. So ironically, I'm going to be the one having the takeaway from this meeting, and I'm going to start calling my postmortem meeting something else from here on in. So I learned something.
Excellent.
Hopefully everybody else did, but I certainly came out of this presentation learning something.
Excellent. Well, I don't see any other anything posted for questions. Everyone has maybe about another 2 minutes to post some questions, and I'll just kind of go back and reiterate that we have Graham Furness back next week. So again, I wanted to sorry, not next week. Let me clarify that. July the 17th is the next date. So I want to just remind everyone that we will not be here for the next 2 weeks. Graham Furness will be back talking about a second look at service catalog. And Graham is definitely back by popular demand. Graham has done an excellent job of structuring his sessions to be purely educational in nature, and you really do get a takeaway of some good learning nuggets like you did today. So defining the service catalog, understanding the purpose of the service catalog, and connecting the service catalog with your ITSM framework. So if that is for you or for somebody else in your organization, feel free to forward that. We appreciate everybody taking the time today to join us for Thought Rock Live again. Julie, thank you very much for another excellent session. And if anybody has, again, any other ideas for either follow-up topics to this, any questions you have for Julie specifically, Julie, I think, is there another slide there with the contact information? That might be the last slide. If not, there you go. So again, we definitely want your feedback. The contact information is there at info@thoughtrock.com. Please reach out to us with any questions, suggestions, topic follow-ups, new topics, hot speakers that you've seen at conferences, you name it. We'll bring it to you. Our team will do the work to go out there and get those folks, to get them organizing content within the 30 to 40-minute nuggets like we do here, and we'll keep bringing you good quality into late summer and obviously into fall and winter of next year. So thanks again, everybody, and we're going to sign off now, and hopefully you have a good next 2 weeks before we see you back, and have a great rest of the late spring and early summer. Take care.